What you're about to hear is the part of history that textbooks mention briefly or avoid completely. Did the modern world really emerge naturally after World War II, or was it quietly redesigned in private rooms by a handful of exhausted but powerful men? This story explores a historical turning point whose real impact was far greater than most people realize. While World War II is remembered for its battles, sacrifices, and victories, the world we live in today was shaped just as decisively after the guns fell silent. In that fragile moment between war and peace, decisions were made that redrew borders, reshaped governments, and locked entire regions into political paths they still follow in 2025. At the time this story begins, the world was shaped by survival, fear, and raw power. Europe was physically shattered. Cities lay in ruins, economies were broken, and tens of millions were dead. The old European empires that had once dominated global politics were exhausted. Into that vacuum stepped new giants, armed not just with armies, but with ideology, ambition, and a clear sense of self-interest. Most historians agree on the basic facts of what happened next. Nazi Germany was defeated. Allied leaders met to decide the future of Europe. Germany was divided. New international institutions were formed. But those facts only tell half the story. They explain what happened, not why the post-war world hardened into opposing camps almost immediately after peace was declared. The common narrative suggests that the Allied leaders worked together in good faith to build a stable and democratic post-war order. According to this version, disagreements were unfortunate but unavoidable, and the Cold War emerged gradually due to ideological differences. While this explanation isn't entirely wrong, it overlooks the private calculations and quiet compromises that were already shaping the outcome before the war had even ended. Behind public speeches and official agreements were private decisions that quietly changed history forever. These were not dramatic betrayals or secret conspiracies in the cinematic sense. They were pragmatic, often cynical choices made by leaders who believed they were acting in the best interests of their own nations, even if it meant sacrificing the future of others. The first cracks appeared before peace was even declared. In October 1944, months before Germany surrendered, Winston Churchill met Joseph Stalin in Moscow. This meeting produced what later became known as the Percentages Agreement. On a simple piece of paper, influence over Eastern European countries was reduced to numbers. Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Yugoslavia, and Greece were assigned percentages of British and Soviet influence. It was informal, undocumented in official treaties, and deliberately vague, but it revealed something crucial. Europe was already being divided in principle, even while the war was still being fought. This moment matters because it shows that the post-war order was not an accident of later misunderstandings, it was anticipated. Leaders understood that whoever liberated a territory would likely control it, and they began accepting that reality quietly, rather than challenging it openly. The war against Nazi Germany was a shared mission, but the peace that followed was already becoming competitive. That competition moved into the open in February 1945 at Yalta Conference, where Franklin D. Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin met to decide the future of Europe. Publicly, Yalta was presented as a triumph of Allied unity. The leaders spoke of democracy, cooperation, and a shared responsibility to prevent another global catastrophe. They agreed on the division of Germany into occupation zones, the punishment of war criminals, and the creation of the United Nations. But beneath those public commitments lay a far fragile reality than official photographs suggested. Franklin D. Roosevelt arrived at Yalta gravely ill and acutely aware that time was not on his side. His primary concern was ending the war against Japan as quickly as possible to avoid an invasion that could cost hundreds of thousands of American lives. Winston Churchill, meanwhile, was confronting the slow decline of British global dominance and the fear that Britain would emerge victorious but diminished. Stalin, whose country had suffered catastrophic losses, entered the talks determined to ensure the Soviet Union would never again be invaded from the West. Each leader walked into Yalta carrying different fears and priorities, and those priorities shaped the outcome far more than the lofty language used in public statements. Stalin sought recognition of Soviet influence across Eastern Europe, framing it as a security necessity. In return, he offered vague assurances of free elections that lacked clear enforcement. Roosevelt accepted those assurances, believing cooperation could still guide the post-war order. Churchill objected privately, but lacked the leverage to change the direction already shaping. The true turning point did not arrive through a dramatic confrontation or open disagreement. Instead, it emerged through what was deliberately left unresolved. The Allies agreed on principles, but failed to define how those principles would be upheld or who would enforce them. There was no binding mechanism to guarantee that Eastern European nations would genuinely choose their own governments without coercion. That silence mattered. It created a gray zone of interpretation that Stalin understood perfectly and later exploited once the Red Army controlled the region on the ground. As pressure increased in the months following Yalta, Allied unity eroded rapidly. Leaders were forced to choose between preserving their influence and risking instability or confrontation. The Soviet Union acted decisively, installing governments aligned with Moscow across Eastern Europe, while reshaping political systems from within. Opposition parties were weakened or eliminated, elections were tightly managed, and security forces loyal to Soviet interests consolidated authority. From the Soviet perspective, this was defensive realism born from wartime trauma. From the Western perspective, it was a clear violation of the spirit of wartime cooperation. The final confirmation that the wartime alliance was collapsing came at Potsdam Conference in the summer of 1945. By then, Roosevelt was dead, replaced by Harry Truman, who was far less trusting of Stalin. Britain itself changed leadership mid-conference after elections brought Clement Attlee to power. The tone of the meeting shifted noticeably. Cooperation gave way to suspicion. At Potsdam, the Allies argued over reparations, borders, and Germany's economic future. Truman, now aware of America's atomic advantage, took a harder line. Stalin, whose armies occupied much of Eastern Europe, saw little reason to compromise. The shared enemy was gone, and with it went the glue holding the alliance together. The climax of this story isn't a single treaty or declaration. It's the quiet realization that the world had been split into spheres of influence that neither side was willing to abandon. Europe became divided not because of misunderstanding, but because power realities made compromise impossible. The Iron Curtain did not fall suddenly. It descended gradually, reinforced by fear, memory, and strategic calculation. The outcome reshaped nations, destroyed old political systems, and created a new global order defined by rivalry rather than cooperation. Germany was divided. Europe was split east and west. Korea would soon follow the same pattern. Former colonies became arenas for proxy conflicts. The Cold War was not planned in a single moment, but it became inevitable once those early decisions were locked in. The deeper meaning of this moment is uncomfortable. It proves that history is often driven more by human emotion and fear than logic or morality. Leaders spoke the language of peace while acting according to survival instincts shaped by trauma and ambition. Ideals mattered, but power mattered more. The modern connection is impossible to ignore. The geopolitical tensions of today, from Eastern Europe to Asia, still reflect the structures built in the aftermath of World War II. Alliances, rivalries, and security doctrines trace their roots back to those post-war decisions. Even in 2025, debates about borders, influence, and sovereignty echo the compromises made at Yalta and Potsdam. The most important detail is usually mentioned last, or not mentioned at all. The world map after World War II wasn't redrawn because everyone agreed on justice. It was redrawn because exhausted leaders made pragmatic choices in a moment when power, fear, and opportunity intersected. Once those choices were made, reversing them became almost impossible. When the full truth is understood, the post-war settlement looks less like an accident and more like an inevitable result of how power operates in moments of transition. Victory created opportunity, and opportunity hardened into structure. The world we inherited was shaped as much by private calculations as by public ideals. If you want to understand why global politics still feels tense, divided, and unstable decades after the last World War, this is where the story begins. These decisions didn't just end a war, they built the framework of the modern world. If you want more deep, factual history that explains how the past still controls the present, like and subscribe.